So thank you everybody for coming. This is the first episode, the inaugural episode of What's Your Story, which is a part of an effort that we're doing called the Gather Project, an experiment in community, basically trying to gather people together around common love of film. And it's been a big hit with students so far. And one of the first things we all decided to do was to reach out to people. You know, students were very interested in getting information from entertainment professionals about how to get in, like what's their story. And so our team from New York, who I will introduce them and let them take this on. They're going to be doing the questions with our dear friend Prentice Penny, who we're thrilled. Again, Prentice, thank you so much for doing this.
Happy to.
Really excited. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to Valery, and Valery, let you take it over.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and joining the Gather Film Society's NYC chapter for our very first What's Your Story interview with the incredibly talented Prentice Penny. So for those who don't know, Prentice is most notable for his role as showrunner on HBO's Insecure, which actually just garnered him his first Emmy nomination, which is so crazy exciting. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm Valery Badio. I'm here with Daviana Angelo and Mars Leclerc, and Daviana will be moderating and taking questions from our audience. So I think just for our very first question, we would just love to know, like, where did your love for film, TV, writing, and producing come from? Like, did you have a moment or a certain film or individual that inspired you?
I think it kind of came, like, I guess twofold. There was one, I remember the first movie I remember seeing was Star Wars. And I remember because my parents took me to go see it and then took me across the street to a Hamburger Hamlet to tell me they were getting divorced. So those moments are like very connected to my memory. So it's like, so it's kind of seared in there pretty tight. But that was the first movie I remember seeing and being like, this is like amazing. And this is what I want to do. And then, like, I was the only child, so I watched a lot of TV. And so just my mind in terms of like wanting to create stories and kind of, you know, imagining worlds and imagining things like that. And because I grew up with like old grandparents, like not like grandparents today that are like super hip and like super active. I grew up with like grandparents that like watch the news at 3 o'clock until 7 o'clock, and then like Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortunes, like old school grandparents. It was like, go do something else right now. So I just would be like, okay, cool. I'm going to go watch the other TV or I'm going to go do this or I'm going to go do that. And so that's really where I think it all kind of came from, was just, you know, needing to occupy time and wanting to, you know, imagine other places and other stories and other worlds and other people. So I think it all kind of started around that same time.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. I think I'm also an only child, so just TV is just such a way to have an adventure when there's no one else to
Absolutely.
So in previous interviews, you mentioned that you were once a teacher, though. So how did you go from being a teacher to getting like the confidence to pursue film, or even like start gathering resources for your first film, Soul Talkin', where you were entering a completely different career field?
Well, I didn't go to school to be a teacher. I went to film school. I went to USC. And so I went there. John Singleton had just put out Boys in the Hood that the summer before. And so when I got there, everybody was like, oh, because I was the only other black film student in the writing program. And so it was like, oh, you're going to be like John Singleton. And so I was like, I guess I'm going to be like John Singleton. And I graduated and I was not John Singleton. So I like needed to like figure something out. So I did like that. I did the indie movie you were talking about just to like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to do this now. I kind of bounced around doing other things. Like I was working at, right after that. And this isn't like now where like, it was very costly to make a movie because you had to buy film, shoot on film, process film, transfer then film to video. You know, there were just so many steps to making a movie. It just was so costly. And if you were shooting on video, then you would have to like Sex Lies, a videotape. You'd almost have to make your narrative of the movie embrace the visual style, because people would be like, why are you shooting this thing on video? So unless you had an idea that super lent itself to that, or you have the money to like make the movie, it was just so costly. And so I was working as a writer in the theme park division for Walt Disney. I was writing music videos for the director Tim Story when he was still directing music videos, because we went to film school together. And then I was like writing internet shorts, like animated little things. And then stuff kind of just dried up. And I was just like, well, and I didn't really go to school to write TV, even though I love TV. SC didn't really have a lot of classes of television at the time. And back then TV was kind of considered like the stepchild of movies. So it was like, if you were doing TV, it was like, oh, you're kind of slumming, or that's like, you like to go to TV to like, like rehab your career and then like whatever, or you'll start in TV and then go into movies and you'll never go back. So there wasn't a lot of TV writing classes. So I was taking extension classes at UCLA to write. And they would offer like night classes to like, things like that. And so I was just writing specs at the same time, but I had to like get like a job. And so I took a job that I could like still have most of my day free to write. And I would also be super invested in. So I was a substitute teacher for 2 years, and I worked at a group home with foster kids. I tutored at like a tutoring center, and I worked at a nonprofit. And I made like $1,400 a month doing 4 jobs. I had no money, but I was doing that for like 3 years, and so that's really what happened. So I actually was only I went to school to write, but then I was like, oh, I need to like support myself in the time that like I'm not doing that. So that's sort of how that happened.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel like you put yourself in situations where you knew that you could write? Because it seemed like you took literally any like type of job where you could get some written creativity out. Do you think that's—
Yeah, I think early on for sure. I mean, I think when I was transitioning to like, okay, like after I graduated and I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And also I wasn't trained to do anything else. So it wasn't like I could just be like, oh, now I'm going to like go work in the business world. I was like, I had no business skills, no other skill set than to like make up imaginary worlds. So I was like, where can I do this? I don't have any other skill sets. So the Disney thing was great because I got to like, do that and travel. But also, a lot of it was like, I was also like self-sabotaging myself in a lot of ways too, because I kind of knew that like writing in television, you had to be in a writer's room, and the fear of like being around other writers and maybe not being good enough was like a real fear that I think a lot of writers feel. And so I would kind of also like try hard, but like just enough to show like I'm making an effort, but not enough to really be all in. And then at a certain point, I just was like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? And so I just had to make a choice to really commit and kind of humble myself in a way that was like, great, I'm going to go get a real job and not worry about what people say about, oh, but you went to film school, but you're teaching. Like I had to like, a lot of that was just my own personal shit that I just had to like kind of like let go of. And then once I did that, it was still like, okay, great. Like I really called that my like needing to grow up from like childhood, like to adulthood of just in my mental state. So that was like a big moment. And it ended up working out, but it was almost like it's almost like the same way that like in Castaway, he had to like let go of the volleyball to like move forward. I had to kind of like let go of things to really say, okay, if I'm going to move this direction, I kind of have to let go of these things that are kind of that I'm doing to get in my own way.
Yeah. There's such a vulnerability to being a writer, to like trusting yourself to put your work out there and like trust other people to receive it a certain way. So I definitely think that's a step a lot of young writers and creatives have to take. I do want to ask you about The Hustle then, because that seemed like the first thing that you had that was out that was about to maybe make it big, but then it unfortunately got canceled. And you once said that it was 2 years and one network ahead of its time. So how much of it do you think is also just getting the right network and the right timing? And do you develop like a third sense for television timing the more you work in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, being at a place where they fully get the show and what you're trying to do is obviously is super important, right? So, Fuse was like, we were their first scripted show. I think might have been their only scripted show, but it was like there's a good side to that, which is like, oh, they're gonna like really back the show, right? And like we never took it anywhere else. Fuse was the first place we took it, and we sold it. So like that's what you want. You know what I mean? It's like they're a music network. They're looking to get in scripted TV. It all makes total sense, right? Because they were trying to do what MTV was doing, right? And kind of branching into scripted. And then they just didn't. Then they realized, oh, we're not gonna do scripted. So it was like, oh, okay, because we were starting to like prep for season 2, and then they were like, oh, the network went through like a restructuring, and I think J-Lo was gonna buy it, and it just was. There was just too many up in the air things of like what their business model was gonna be, and then they just said, well, we can't make a decision on if we're doing scripted or not, and so they were just like, we have to cancel it because we can't hold the actors in deals, we can't hold you, we can't pay to like keep all these things going in like a treading water scenario. So that ended up being what happened. But that's actually like a dream thing, is people buy it right away, and you think that they're, I don't like, they believed in that, and they believed in what they thought they were going to do. It's just the network, there's just things out of your control. But then obviously, 2 years later, it's like, here's Empire. You know what I mean? So it's like I knew that like there was an audience for it, because obviously in hip hop, there's all these reality shows, there's all these like magazines, there's all this content, but there's nothing in a scripted space that clearly is like a show, and clearly like there's an audience for it. So we knew there was an audience for it. It was just not there at Fuse, and but had that maybe been at HBO or somewhere else, blah, blah, Showtime or wherever, or certainly in the advent of streaming now, you know what I mean? Like a show like that would be totally fine. It just was at the time, just wasn't there.
Yeah. What do you try to take away from projects that haven't succeeded as much?
Well, even like with that, right? Like to your point, is like what I took from that was like, one, I got to run a show, right? And so that ended up helping me get Insecure. Right. So I could walk into HBO and say, like, I know what it's like to like put together a writer's room. I know what it's like to, supervise all, I know what it's like to run a room. Even though we did 6 episodes, it was kind of like a first step into that world. Because even the first season of Insecure, we only did 8. So it wasn't like I was like, oh man, I got to go from like 6 to like 22. It was like, I was kind of taking, it's like not that much different, so I know how to talk to directors. I know how to talk to actors. I know how to, edit. I know how to do all those things. So that's something, I always think there's always something to take from the process, whether it works or not. I mean, you learn a lot from the, it's like they say, you learn a lot from your failures than you do your successes. But you just try to take all the things I learned from that. I learned how to, run a room, and not just like run it from a practical standpoint, but understand that like, writers are, I'm on the other side of the table. So like writers are people. And so you're managing people, trying to understand personalities. How do you get these personalities to all kind of blend well? And so those were things that I learned along the way, that again, all those steps again ended up helping me get Insecure in the relationships that I was developing. So like, even like originally, like, Puffy was an EP on The Hustle, and they just couldn't close this deal because it was just too costly for him to be, his EP budget was going to be more than almost what we were going to be spending an episode. So they just couldn't close that deal. But like, I got to develop a relationship with him that's helped me in other ways, in other projects. I got to, all the people who were ancillary to it, like the Breakfast Club and Charlamagne, the God and Angela Yee, and those guys, like they've been helpful when I was trying to do upscale and doing stuff with Insecure. Like all the relationship stuff just were super helpful out there. And other writers I got to work with and meet on that show, and the relationships that's yielded. So there's a ton of things that, whether something succeeds or not, you always try to take like, hey, what worked, what didn't, but beyond what worked or what didn't work, because sometimes things stay on the air or are successful regardless of the other things that go along with that, right? And so I don't try to measure that like, whether it's stayed on the air 1 season, 5 seasons, whatever the time length is, as the barometer of success or failure, right? Because there are things that you can be a part of that you kind of don't learn. Like there are shows where you're like, oh, I could do the show in my sleep. Well, okay, well, like, and that's fair. That would be deemed, a success because it's on the air, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's successful for you or you're learning from it, right? Those are 2 different things, right? And so I try to like separate those things, right? Because there's like, Insecure has been super successful and I've learned a lot from it, you know what I mean? But I've learned just as much from like the other things that maybe haven't gone in the same way. So it's just all what you learn and what you take from it.
Yeah. Well, we have a question from our audience too, kind of about this. Just asking what persistence has meant to you in your career, and if you have any advice for young filmmakers who may be hesitant to take like those risks or enter those projects that would push them a bit further than what they like, so that they would learn new experiences. And those can be kind of scary. How do you encourage yourself to do that?
I mean, persistence is, to answer the question, I guess, about persistence, I think, you know, the business has shown me, like, I was like, oh, this year I would have been working 16 years. I got my first job in '04. And so I remember when I first started, the idea of even working 5 years seemed like, oh my God, if I could just work 5 years, that would just be like amazing. And now you're like, oh man, it's 16. And like, I feel like I'm just kind of getting started in a sense. And so, and it's so mind-boggling to think that. And so I've learned that the business is a marathon, and you have to figure out what's a chess move and what's a checker move, right? And so there are decisions you'll make that are benefit you in the short term, and there are decisions you have to make that will hopefully benefit you in the long term, right? And so the persistence is really like, you just got to get up and do it, right? And when, you know, I got some good news yesterday about a project, and I got some tough news yesterday about a project, and that's the ebb and flow of everything, right? You just have to kind of say, okay, if this is the career you're going into, you kind of got it's a roller coaster, and you got to be okay with the ups and downs, right? Just as much as you're flying high, you can just as easily dip. So I think you just have to be comfortable. No, that's the business. There's times it's amazing, there's times that it sucks, right? To the other question about the taking on scary projects, I think that, like, if a project doesn't in some way scare you and you go, I don't know how I'm going to do this, then it's kind of not worth doing. I've learned now that, like, all the projects that were like, this is like a no-brainer, those either A, not as interesting, or B, don't go exactly as they're supposed to go. The projects that always, I think, well, again, whether or not they succeed or not is not I don't look at whether or not they get on the air, stay on the air all that time as the barometer. I look at it as, did something scare you and you did it, right? And did you feel like you took a chance and pushed yourself is the thing, right? Because there's so many things in this business that are like, at the end of the day, like, are not in your control. Like, I remember when I was making my movie 2 years ago, it's just we were vacillating between, like, we had just got some independent money, and we were vacillating between, like, Netflix had stepped up and Sony wanted to do it, and a few other people wanted to make it. And we were thinking, you know, everybody's debating, well, should we stay independent and then we can, you know, kind of get a big festival thing? Or if we go with this thing, we're going to get a release and then maybe it's not, you know, everybody has an opinion about that. And what I learned was, like, but all those things are out of my control. I was like, what do I control, right? I can control making the best movie I can make. But once I put that movie, once I'm done and a person hits play on their computer or, like, goes to a theater to watch it, I no longer control it, right? So I was like, I don't control whether or not the studio is going to release it on a certain day, and that day is 9/11. I don't control whether or not I hire this actor, and then the week before the movie's going to come out, that actor gets in some kind of scandal and nobody wants to go see the movie now. I don't control, you know, whether or not, you know, they're going to release the marketing right or the promotions right, or, like, release it on a day that, like, Avengers 7 comes out. Like, you know, there are so many things that you don't control that I said, all I can control is the process. Right. Everything else is, so I was like, I just want to make a good enough movie that when somebody's watching it 2 years from now, 3 years from now, they can hit play and go, wow, it's a really good movie. I love that he did this thing or took that chance. And so when we were shooting, my DP was always like, you got to go all out to the end of to the edge of the cliff and just don't go over. But you got to go to the cliff and play there. And I think that, like, that's a big thing that I'm trying to continuously do now, which is, like, go be as uncomfortable as possible. Like, go be as uncomfortable as possible, but not to a place where you're going to kill yourself, right? Or drown. But you got to get out of, you gotta, because that's where the interesting stuff happens, is when you're like, you don't know. It's like, oh, where is this going? You know, right. You don't have the answers. It's terrifying not to have answers, right? But that's where the fun happens.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
Like you said, you didn't know Insecure was, as Kevin was saying, was going to blow up as much as it did, and
literally had no, yeah. But it was, but that was also a thing where I was also going through a place in my life when I was working with Kevin, and doing Insecure, where I just wanted to pick projects that I felt were like dope. And I just wanted to be around people that were dope and doing dope things. And I didn't care. Like I was on Brooklyn Nine-Nine and I was like making a very comfortable living. And I have a family. So like I could have stayed and it would have been totally valid for me to like stay there and like make money. And it was a fun show to work on and the people were great. But I felt creatively I needed to move. And I was willing to take like, a 90% pay reduction to take a chance than to like just kind of be comfortable. And I just wanted to start at a certain point. I was just like, what's my legacy going to be behind like the art I leave behind? Not that people are going to be like, 100 years from now, what did Prentice Penny do? But I felt for me, I was like, I want to start making things that I feel like, because when you work in television, you're always working in somebody else's voice, right? You're always like, okay, I'm mimicking this other writer's style of whatever. But for me at that point, I just felt like, I just want to be around people that are making dope shit. And that's where it really started from. And that's where I still stand now. It's just, yeah.
I think like it made sense at the time. I think Insecure came out at a time where like everyone was like wanted to just consume it so much because what was it, like 2016 election year, like and Issa Rae's like her humor, the lightness to it. I think it seems personable.
But it's so funny because like we didn't know. Like I came on that project in 2000, like February, March 2015. So like I'm almost going on 6 years of working on this show, and like at the time, nobody knew like Issa was going to be a big star. Nobody certainly knew. Here's this, dark-skinned African-American woman with like natural hair. Like that's the cover girl. Like nobody was like, oh yeah, that's like a natural progression because nothing in our society to that point was looking that way, And same with like, I just look at like when it was like she, me, and Melina. It was like Melina had never done scripted before as a director. I technically hadn't run something at this level, and Issa was like an internet actress at that point, So it was like nothing in that package goes, you know what, that show's gonna get an Emmy one day. I mean, you know what I mean? Like nothing was looking that way, but we didn't care. It felt like when we were making that, I felt like film school again. Cause I felt like, we're just making something that we think is cool. And like our friends will like, I was like, I know my friends will like this show. I was like, I can show my friends this pilot all day. We'll be busting up because this is so good. But we didn't know. We'd be lying. I mean, we hoped just to get picked up, but we were like, we'll get picked up maybe, and maybe it'll happen in like 2 years because that's kind of how HBO is at the time. So none of it was like, we shot it, edited it, in a month and a half we were picked up the series. I mean, none of that we thought would happen. So
yeah. Even so, you said I remember I watched like Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl, like the little YouTube series that she had, and it was just, she looked like just a normal woman doing a show. Did you used to watch it too? Because you said that at some point, just we clearly stalked you and did a lot of research, but you wrote
you guys went deep.
Yeah. You wrote a letter to Issa to convince her to have you as a showrunner. How did you do that? Like it seemed like such her baby, like it was so personal to her, and you came on and it grew into something big. What did you put in that letter?
I was like, I'll make you a cover girl. No. No, well, it's so funny. Like, I didn't really watch I was a working writer at the time she was doing this. So like, I wasn't like fully plugged into like everything that was happening on the internet in terms of like web series. It just wasn't that I was like consumed by like the television, like I won't say real television, but like I'm on a show, right? But we grew up like a block over from each other. So I remember she was like in LA Magazine, like little weekend, little thin things they give out. And they had done like a piece on her. My mom saw it and my mom was like, oh, do you know how moms are? I'm like, do you know this girl, Prenny? Because that's my nickname is Prenny. She's like, Prenny, do you know this girl? She grew up around the corner from us, blah, blah, blah. She has this little web series. I was like, Mom, I don't know her, like, blah, blah. But the name Issa had stuck out with me because it was such a very specific name. And then when Larry Wilmore left, when the show got picked up and Larry Wilmore had to leave to go do the nightly show for Comedy Central, they needed a showrunner. And it was also, again, it's at that time where I was transitioning and wanting to like just do other things that I just thought was like, oh, that's just dope as art. And I was like, oh, this is the chick that my mom was telling me about. And so I was like, oh, yeah, showrunner. I was kind of ready to like make that jump. And we have the same, my agent it went to college with Issa. And also Lena Waithe, who is friends with Issa, Lena's first job was a writer's assistant on Girlfriends, where I was on. So I've known Lena since like 06, 07. Like I've known Lena like when that was like her first job from Chicago. So like that was like the homie. So I just asked Lena, I was like, you know, and this is like before she's Lena, she's just the homie Lena. And so I was like, hey, can you call and like put in a word? I know y'all friends. And she was like, yeah, for sure. And then my agent was like, I was like, I was like, can I read the script? And I love the script. And I was like, and I just knew it. Like, I was like, I was like, you know, I know LA. I grew up in LA. I know this world. I had worked at it. And again, you don't realize how all these things are going to kind of come full circle. Like I had worked at a nonprofit right before I was a writer. So I knew how it feels to work at a nonprofit, to be a Black person at a nonprofit that's mostly all white. So I'd had that experience. But I just knew what she was doing. I know what it's like to be awkward and uncomfortable. Like it was just all of those things, you know, race, culture. Like I knew and it was very LA. And again, we grew up a block over from each other. So I just knew the world. And my agent at the time was like, why don't you write her like a letter? And I was like, that's a great idea. And so I just wrote her a letter about like what I loved, what I thought I could bring to it, you know, and I was relating to like, I felt like the way Mara, because my first job was on Girlfriends. And so Mara Brock-Akil really like shaped and like, it was like, I feel like I didn't go to an HBCU, but like, that's what I felt like being on Girlfriends was like, just all the support of all these amazing Black writers and was just great. And so I felt like the way Mara kind of shepherded me and brought me in, I wanted to like give that energy and that protection to somebody else, because the beauty of a show like Insecure, those shows don't come along every day, and they certainly don't come along on like a network like HBO every day. And so I felt very, I was like, oh, if this was me, who would I want to have be my showrunner, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was very big, and I was like, I want to help protect her because I don't know what they're wanting her. I could assume maybe I'm not going to look like the showrunners they might have considered for her. Either through, maybe I'm not old enough, maybe I'm not the right color, whatever the things are, I just understand how the business works. And so I just wanted to be like a shepherd for her. Mm-hmm. And I felt that that's what I could offer. I could offer all these things that I had been learning and give it to somebody who doesn't know those things, right? And so I wrote her a letter of what I thought I could do to help, what I loved. And really, even if you don't want to mess with me, like I'm just here as like a resource. Like I just think what you're doing is dope. You're getting a great opportunity. And if I could help be a part of it in any way or just help you, I'm here, like all good. And then she was like, yeah, let's meet. And so we met and we realized we just know all the same people. That's when we realized we grew up a block over from each other. We just had so many things in common. We honestly met and just started cracking each other up. And in 15 minutes, she was like, do you want to just do it? Let's just do it. And I was like, yeah. I was like, great. And that literally happened within 15 minutes. And here we are almost 6 years later. So that's how it happened.
That's incredible. I feel like you definitely need to thank your mom in your Emmy acceptance.
Oh, she always says that. So yeah, for sure.
We'll be waiting for that. So what is it like? So I feel like you mentioned Girlfriends. I know Girlfriends was produced by Kelsey Grammer. I feel like Insecure, all the names, like the bigger names attached to it, mainly like you and Issa, it's two Black people telling the story of like Black people on the show, as opposed to in the past when it has been maybe like the name that had to be attached to it was someone like Kelsey Grammer. Do you feel like that gives you more creative freedom as you're show running?
I mean, yeah. Well, Mara's situation, and I don't know all the ins and outs because obviously that deal happened before I got there. You know, sometimes they put you, because Kelsey's grant was with Paramount, Kelsey's deal was with Paramount, and again, I don't know all the ins and outs, but from what I've pieced together, and is that sometimes they say like, oh, we're gonna put you under a deal under somebody else that has the thing there because we're gonna pick it up, right? So when I was there, but again, I got the Girlfriend season 5 through 8. The show had already been going. So I don't know. And GramNet really wasn't involved in like, here's our notes. And like, they just weren't involved. Now, I don't know if they were the first 4 seasons. I can't obviously speak to that. But I think like sometimes it's just like, let's slide you under this. Sometimes it's just a dollar placement thing about where we're sliding you. But I wouldn't know that as much about that. But on HBO, I think a lot of times it's where you're at, right? So HBO allows you to do certain things that like maybe ABC won't allow you to do, right? Or another network for like for some example. And I think the time we came on specifically also was starting to matter. Like I think if Issa was trying to do Insecure 8 years ago, might be a different situation. She might not even have a say. You know what I mean? So I think it's hard to say like, yes, do I believe that like, because Issa and I are both Black and like, we're able to like, we are here to support that, right? As opposed to like, Issa doesn't have to explain, and not that a white showrunner would do this, but I'm saying, let's just say a white showrunner have a difference of opinion about something with Issa. Well, now Issa has to like argue or push back from the person who's supposed to be in the trenches with her, right? So then you have another uphill fight if the network is doing that, right? So, and again, and HBO has never been like that. I'm just saying that like one step she doesn't have to worry about is like the understanding from her to the showrunner. You know what I mean? So like that step is taken out. So there's never a concern on that front. And then the network doesn't. So it's like obviously it's like an easier pipeline. So I will say that, yes, I think anytime that you have people that are creatively aligned with what you're trying to do, it will always be easier.
Yeah.
So yeah.
How do you balance like the creativity of writing and the structure of producing?
I mean, I think that's when honestly having a really talented writer's room is beneficial, and a diverse writer's room. I mean, I've been a part of writer's rooms where you're like, oh, there's like, certainly I've been the only one of, I've been the only male writer of color on a bunch of shows. But I think also sometimes showrunners get into a barrel where they will think they need to hire 6 writers who are just like them, because they think that speaks to like, oh, well, they'll know my experience, and so I don't have to explain it. And that's true-ish to a degree, right? My philosophy is, well, if you know your experience, then nobody will know it better than you, and you don't necessarily need as many people to tell your experience, because you're the boss. At the end of the day, if you're like, I want it all to be this, well, then guess what it's going to be? It's going to all be this. You don't necessarily need like 6 people to confirm your own thing, right? So for me, it was always about having as many people who were contra. I mean, when we first got the show picked up, I was getting all these submissions of agents being like, this person is just like Issa. And I was like, I don't need a writer just like Issa. I have Issa. What I need is another writer that's like, who's going to piss Issa off in the room, or give her something contrary to think about, or be a difference of opinion than her, not someone who's amening her experience. I was like, I know that. And secondarily, she knows it more importantly, right? So it's almost like I use this analogy a lot. It's like, when you think about the Avengers, there's not like 4 Iron Men. You have a Hulk, they all bring a skill set to the group to help fight. And that's what I think your writer's room has to be. Every writer they should all be able to write in the show, but everybody should have a different, when I look around our writer's room, I know specifically why I hired each writer, and I know what they specifically bring outside of being like immensely talented and funny. Like, but I know like when I read your stuff, I read this in your stuff, and that's the stuff when you're pitching, you'll pitch me like little things like, there are writers that I hired that are like, oh, just great with like really beautiful moments, right? There's writers I hired that have such a dark sensibility. There are writers I have hired who give me something so weird that I'm like, they're gonna pitch me 8 weird things that are never gonna work, but they'll pitch 2 that are like the best. And that's what I'm there for, right? So it's just figuring out when you bring those things out. So saying all that to say is that a lot of my stuff with writers is like, I'm supervising writers. Obviously I'm writing some, because that's what we all do. But a lot of it is like, you're trying to take a thing of clay every episode and like shape it. And okay, that idea is great. That one, not so much. But the thing you said earlier, like, that's really interesting. Let's like take that and now funnel this and like, so it's like that. That's the thing, right? So, but I can also like leave the writer's room to go be the set and know that the writers I hired will like deliver they'll give me like amazing jokes. I don't have to worry like, oh my God, they're in the room working and like, I know it's not going to be any good. Like why did I hire those guys? You know what I mean? So a lot of it is just having really amazing and conversely casting great talent, right? So I don't necessarily have to be on set for this because I know Yvonne or Issa or Jay or Kendrick or Alon or whomever, Natasha, Amanda, will do the scene the way it's supposed to be because they're like super talented. So I don't have to like babysit and go, oh my God, they're not gonna know it. You know what I mean? So it's like that, it's helpful when you can produce, when you hire smart people to like do all the main heavy lifting, when they're giving you like, oh, my production designer is amazing. She's gonna give me like, the hard part is gonna be picking the choice, not she won't get it, you know? And so it all makes, if you do that and I try to make myself be the dumbest person in the room. I want to be the least talented and the dumbest in the room all the time, because then I just get good stuff.
No, that really does make sense. I think it's interesting to have people like Natasha Rothwell, who is talent, but she also writes some episodes, and I think like you can really feel it because like some episodes I'm like, oh, that felt like more like the comedy was just more Kelly comedy, I think, or like more, you know. So I think like having that sort of.
It's interesting too, because the truth is, to be honest, like nobody can tell. I've been around people that go like, I bet if you pitch me something right now that you think Natasha did, I'll be like, no, that was this little white girl we have on our staff right there. Because like that's the beauty. Like what you think is like, that's the beautiful part. Because the truth is, people come up to me all the time and go, that was you. I know you and you wrote that. I go, I didn't write that line at all. You know what I mean? Or in any of that, sometimes there are things that I write that people go like, I know you didn't write that line. That was just like weird or whatever. And I go, yep, yeah. You know what I mean? So I think the point to the point that I was making is when you hire smart people, that's their job, is to make it all look like it's all, because we all have a hand in rewriting it. We all have a hand in shaping it. We all have a hand. So like, you just never know, and that's kind of the beauty. Is that's what we want, and that's if you hire smart people, you'll get that. You'll get where it won't really know who's doing what, and I think that's the part I love that you say that, because I'm like, and you might actually be right, and you could 100% be right. But
I think to what you're saying, just how even with her, like she'll have the weirdest lines in the show, but then like that episode with Lawrence and Issa when they go to the art museum or the art street fair, that was such a beautiful episode, and she wrote it, and it's like so different from like the raunchy humor that you hear like in her one-liners, but then she writes like this love, like just beautiful episodes. I think like Insecure really has mastered that. I don't know.
But even in that, it's like it's so funny to say that because we break it all together.
Yeah.
So like that's the funny part, is like you kind of don't know, like, yeah, I love that. So I'm gonna keep the mystery going, and like that's how the sausage gets made. So I love that. I love that.
Okay. Tell her I said it. I thought it was good for her name.
No, but what I will say, and this is what we do, is as we're like figuring out which writer, because it's not just that the writer is writing the episode, or sometimes they might write half, and sometimes somebody else might write another half, or this part or that part or whatever. What we're also thinking about when we're writing episodes, or we're figuring out who's going to write what episode, we're also thinking about like, okay, when this episode is on set, the writer is always on set for their episode. So we're also trying to find, okay, when you're on set though, like what do you offer specifically better than any other writer in the room will offer for this episode? So when the actors turn and go like, you know, because directors in TV are kind of like mercenaries. They're just kind of like, they're in for the week and then they're kind of gone, right? So they don't necessarily know, you know, what's come before it or what's going to initially come after it. They're just thinking about, this is my episode this week. And they'll usually read all the scripts before there just to have a context, but they definitely don't read after it, because it's like, this doesn't concern me. I'm not worried about what's going to happen after. Mm-hmm. I'm only concerned about right now. But sometimes sometimes they might make a directing choice that will impact an episode later, that we're like, you can't have them say it like this because it will ruin episode 10, which you know nothing about and won't be here for. So that's why having the writer there is important, because they know everything. And sometimes we might have a director that's come in season 3, but they might do something that we tried 2 seasons ago, so they might not be thinking like, oh, what works, what doesn't work. So having the writer there not only like helps the director, but helps the actor. So when they go like, I'm having a hard time, like, like locking into this or doing whatever, that they bring a specific skill set to that episode. So to your point about Natasha loves rom-coms. Natasha loves Sex and the City. Natasha, anytime there's about romance or rom-com, that's all Natasha wants to do, be a part of, talk about. She loves love. Her parents have been married 50 years. She loves love. So when we were thinking about that episode, we felt she would be the right person for it for those reasons, right? It's a gigantic love story that's playing out between our two of our main characters. So she felt the right. So like when we're on set, I don't have to worry about Natasha being able to like talk to them about what we were thinking and the love angle and all these types of things, because I just know that's her natural default. So like that's where like something like that is super handy, because that is like who she is in her bones. Mm-hmm. And so when we assign writers to episodes, we try to like match that energy up to certain writers.
That makes sense. That's really beautiful. I want to ask you then, so you directed the Hella LA episode. So this one I felt was like really important because it featured a scene where Lawrence is fetishized during like this threesome that he's having. And at first it starts off like ooh, spontaneous, and he realizes that he is not the first Black man that these two non-Black women have chosen to sleep with. So how do you feel that, like, why did you choose to direct that episode, and how did you feel to handle like that situation while directing?
I ended up directing, that was my first episode I directed. I don't know how it ended up coming out. I ended up directing that one. I don't remember. It's been so long. I don't remember why specifically I directed that one, like more so than any other one. I think it might have just been where it fell. I think I really liked the script. And I think it just fell at a time where like I could do it and still have like, it wasn't going to affect the schedule. Like I can't remember. I wish I could answer why, but that story happened to a friend of mine, almost like verbatim. So I remember a friend of mine who was recently divorced and was like, I'm back out here. And that story literally happened to him. He was at a Ralph's, he got picked up. I mean, literally the story he told me is what happened to him. And I was laughing as he told me the story. I was like, I didn't know where it was going. And it's like a Playboy letter that starts and then it just takes like a harsh turn left, you know what I mean? And so I remember as he told me the story, I kept thinking about where I thought it was going. And then when he told me where it went, I was just like, I was on the floor and I felt bad at the same time. And then I watched him realize, I don't know if I'm built for these streets like this anymore. Like, and I watched him go through that process as he's telling me the story. And I just came in, I was like, that's amazing. And again, we had a character, Lawrence, kind of going through a similar thing, thinking it's going to be all kind of great. And everybody laughed as I was telling the story in the room the same way and felt horrible in the same way. The only part that didn't happen was the cops part, but everything else was exactly how it happened for him. And so I think, so maybe that might've been why I directed it, because I had kind of pitched this story, even though it wasn't even though I didn't write that episode. I felt I had like a good handle on sort of what it should be. But again, that's a classic example of like hearing a story and being like, let's put that almost verbatim in the episode. And we have a few moments like that in the show where it's like, oh my God, that's priceless. Let's put that in the show.
That's crazy. I would not have thought that. I think like it's a situation that I could see being real, but not that I can imagine happening to someone, because it's so laughably.
It's like, so yes, like it's so like that doesn't ever happen. Because as he's telling it to me, I'm like, it doesn't happen. But my friend doesn't lie either. So and then because he's just not that kind of guy to like, and also it doesn't end up well for him. So like he didn't have like a reason to like lie. It definitely does not end well for him at all. It doesn't end well for Lawrence either.
Yeah. Okay, well, I wanted to ask you, so you said like Natasha loves rom-coms. It seems like you love wine. I just because the wind downs after Insecure, Uncorked, or just like um, having the intersection of Black people in these, or like enjoying these more bougie things. So like with Upscale with Prentice Penny, could you talk to me more about this interest? Like what it is that you find intriguing about that intersection? And like, I thought it was really interesting, like the beginning of Uncorked, which is now on Netflix, everyone. But he explains white wines as hip hop artists, or like compares them, and like I don't know that much about wine, so I was like taking down notes, and I was like, okay, great, Riesling, I can do this. What do you find like fun about that or interesting?
Yeah, I did. Well, to separate the two, the wine thing happened merely because I had the idea for Uncorked about a father-son story. And I felt like people of and maybe this kind of answers all of those questions. It's like I feel like people of color don't ever get to like be basic in movies. Yeah. Like I feel like our family stories kind of have to have some sort of like trauma around them. Like I was like, white people get to make like Good Will Hunting and Manchester by the Sea and like Lady Bird and these sort of like slice of life on a Tuesday kind of movies. And we don't really get to make those. And I certainly felt like father-son stories with Black men are always usually about the father's absence, as opposed to like they just have two issues as men and they just need to figure it out. And so that's kind of, at least it was a starting point of that, but I didn't know what I wanted the son to do for a living. I knew, this kind of based on me and my dad. My dad ran a furniture store that was a family business, which was very blue collar, like the barbecue place. And I wanted to be a writer, but I knew I didn't want the son to write in the movie. So I was trying to find something that felt a little elevated or whatever. And I just happened to go to Paris. I'd never been there. I didn't even drink wine. Like I drank like Behringer, White Zinfandel. Not that I'm shitting on Behringer. It's like you love Behringer, you love it. But like, yeah, I'd be like at the Essex Festival drinking like White Zinfandel. That was like my wine knowledge at the time. And I was like going to Paris, and I was like, it was around my wife's and I anniversary, which is actually this Sunday, weirdly the same as the Emmys. But we were like, I was like, look, if I don't like wine in Paris, I'm never gonna like wine. It's like going to New Orleans and like not liking gumbo. It's like if you don't like gumbo in New Orleans, you're just not fucking with gumbo. So I signed up for this wine class, and wine's, you know, it's all intimidating because you got to read a label. You're like, I don't know, is this good, bad? Like I don't know what the hell this is. And but the guy made it super easy to understand when I was there, and I was like, oh, this is like not that complicated. It's complicated, but from a base level, I was like, oh, I get it. Like there's areas that do certain things, and this is how to read the label with the alcohol. This is high, this is low. And I just got super into it the whole trip. And then I was like, oh, and then I saw a documentary called Son, which is a really great documentary. And I was like, oh, this should be what the son should want to do. And then obviously there's like natural food, wine, blah, blah, blah. You know, all the sort of things kind of pair up. You know, wine is regional, barbecue's regional. Things felt like, oh, these are two men that kind of can't get along, that have similar interests in a very specific world about the thing that they love, just kind of can't figure it out, right? So, but to the other part, so that's sort of where the wine part came from. But coming back to the other thing, which was, you know, you grow up and what you kind of do is like what your parents do. So like when we grew up, like after church, my dad would like, we're gonna go like make hamburgers or whatever. So we would just like go to the grocery store, get hamburger meat and like make hamburgers. We get like American slices and like make hamburgers, right? But like you get older and you go like, oh, what's this cheese? Oh, what's Gouda? What's Manchego? And you just start. But sometimes we still just do what our family does, and we never like venture out past like the reservation a little bit and go like, oh wait, I can go to like a butcher and like they can like do the same thing and it's fresh, like, and it's kind of the same cost, or like this isn't really that much, you know what I mean? You'll have like a world of different experience. And I was having that in real time as I was getting older, working on different shows and like meeting other people who like would be like, yes, I go to this thing now or that thing. And I'd be like, oh, what's this? I realized that like sometimes we don't, I mean, just like in the class where the teacher says any questions, nobody wants to raise their hand because nobody wants to look stupid. That's how we go through life too. We go through life, everybody goes through life not wanting to be stupid. We're afraid to like do anything, afraid to ask questions, afraid to like, you know, whatever. And so again, to the point of like, what I was saying earlier of like, I'm kind of stopped getting out of my own way. I just was like, I want to just start asking more questions and like seeing what's out there. Wait, I can go to a tailor. I can go to because you think in your mind, oh, tailored suit, it's got to be expensive. That's for like athletes and this. And you go like, oh, a tailored suit is like $800 and a regular suit is like $400, but this suit looks immensely better on me than that. And it's like not that much of a difference, but this one's made for me. Like what? That's crazy. I can pick all this. Like I thought like, CEOs are the ones that have tailored suits, not regular people. So those are the things that I started to just ask questions about in my life, about what I was doing. And the more I got into it, the more I just kind of got into it. And the more that I was like, Black people, but you never see people of color again talking about those things, doing those things. It's always like, rest in peace, Anthony Bourdain and people like that who were like, oh, like, but we travel and we like nice,
Yeah.
Find me a Black person who don't want to look good. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like that. I was like, yeah, we like all these things too. Black people love champagne. Like Black people love the pop bottles. It's more, so like, I just was like, but we never see us do that outside of like the expected like rappers and athletes, but white people would just have regular people doing it. It's like, you can just see like, it feels regular. Like you don't have to be like exceptional. It's like, oh, this is a movie where Diane Keaton has like a farmer sink and she's just like doing these amazing things and she's just a regular person. But for us, it's gotta be like Jay-Z's gotta introduce us to it. You know what I mean? And so I just was like, so that's where it all kind of came from. I was just like, we're regular. We like saying the same things and like, we like those things too and explore those things. So that's where it all kind of came from.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that there's just like this, sometimes the diction of like reading the wine or like having it be in another language or the upscale things, just like taking an extra step seems like it's something that only bougie people can do. Like we don't deserve to like understand, or like we should just stick with what we have, like be happy with what we already have. So I think upscale like makes it so that it's just like a fun little adventure that we go with you on to learn more about things that like everyone wants to drink champagne and like have a good quality clothing, like
and again, to your thing about like success or failures of projects, right? Like that was another thing where like I had zero interest in ever being in front of the camera, and I still have zero interest in ever being in front of the camera. Like that was the thing literally where my manager was like, we were just talking, having these conversations, and he put together like a deck of like what a show could be. And even though it said upscale Prentice Penny, I never assumed I would be in front of it. I just always assumed like, oh, upscale. Like in my mind, I was thinking of it like created by, not you have to like go do this stuff, because I was like in TV. So I was like, I don't do this. I've never done it before and nobody's going to buy it with me. I've never done it. And I had no interest, and literally the first place we pitched it, they bought it. Like, so it wasn't even like we were like, oh man, like I'm really trying to be in front of the camera. Oh man, like we're really like out here hustling this show. It was like, we took it to True TV, they bought it. I guess we're doing, I mean, literally it's like how it happened. Like I'm not even lying. And so, but again, it was like, like that show, not the right network, where like everything on the network is like in a much like more broad comedic way. And I was trying to do something that felt certainly me, but also like how I wanted to shoot it. With I was trying to elevate the shooting and the style of the thing, the style of the show and the framing of stuff. To me, I was selling it as like, if Wes Anderson was doing a lifestyle show, how would we shoot that? And that's what it should be shot like. And again, everything on that network is, one color of people, and then here was I, so it was like, if that show maybe existed on like, again, like Quibi, where it's a 10-minute show, or it's around supported by more diverse things, like maybe it pops off there in a different way, or maybe it doesn't, who knows? But I definitely knew fairly early on in the process, this probably is not going to be a good place for the show. Just because at that point, I was working on Insecure, and I was experienced enough to know shows have to support each other. And I understood how the other shows on the network supported each other. I didn't know what I was supporting, nor did I know who was supporting me and what they were putting me with. And so, but at that point I was like, well, I don't know what to do. They bought, they bought it. I guess I could have said no, but I didn't even think, like, you know what I mean? Like, it was such a weird experience, but a great experience. But again, I learned so much. And having learned stuff from Insecure, I was able to bring that there. And then there were things I learned there that I was like, oh, like as I'm going into unscripted now, in terms of selling other shows that are unscripted, I have a better reference point again of like, okay, I know I want to do this, not this. Let's set it up like this, not like that. So that's again, an experience that I got to do something that I had no desire to do. That I just felt it was like a freebie.
Yeah, so, you just like fall into it, but
yeah, literally.
So for in Upscale, you have like guests from shows that you've written on and produced on, like Adam Pally from Happy Endings, which was so funny. Stephanie Beatrice, so like from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. How closely do the writers and producers work with the actors to foster such relationships that you can later bring them back on later projects of yours?
Yeah, like I mean, I think sometimes it's like the opportunity, right? So like on Happy Endings, that was a show I love working on Happy Endings. Such a great experience,
so
and such
funny.
a fun group. And that was another thing like Insecure, where it was like we're this little bitty show, and like we always felt like we were in danger of being canceled, and we were always like we make each other laugh on this show, and the actors were all new too. So like it's filmed with Insecure, like nobody knew who Issa or Yvonne or I mean, Jay was like our most successful person, but nobody knew Alon or any of those people. And same with Happy Endings. Like Elisha Kirkwood was like the most famous person, and like Damon Wayans because he had a Wayans last name, but like nobody really knew anybody, you know, in terms of the show. And so we all sort of felt like we were kind of creating something from scratch and crafting something really kind of special. So, so we just developed the closest, you know what I mean? And so, but Pally and I particularly hit it off when I'd be on set. And so, and we just stayed friends, you know. And so when Upscale came, I was like, yo, because he saw me posting about it, and he was like, yo, can I come down or whatever? And I was like, of course, like, yeah. And Stephanie, I just called and was like, hey, would you ever want to do this? And she was just like, yeah, like Stephanie's another person, like on set, we just like hit it off and we're cool. And you just develop friendships. Like on Brooklyn, I was a co-EP, so a lot of times I would be the writer covering set, especially if we had a younger writer. Mm-hmm. So Andre Brower does not suffer fools. So he and I particularly hit it off. And same with Andy Samberg. And so Andy would always kind of want me there if it was a younger writer, just to kind of talk through ideas and pitch jokes. And so he and I hit it off. And so I would just be down there a lot. So I would be there almost, you know, at least 3 out of 5 days every week. So I got to obviously know Stephanie, know Melissa, know Terry, you know, know Joe, and everybody. So and Stephanie was just a relationship that I just developed as like, that's the homie. And yeah.
That's lovely. We have to wrap up. Okay, so to sort of end up, I just want to ask about how you are adapting Insecure and Upscale for this crazy gross year, you know, like we're in the middle of a pandemic, you have to do your writer's room, like be creative without the affect of being in a writer's room. How is that going? How is it?
Well, Upscale, I'm not doing that anymore, but on Insecure, yeah, we're all working remotely, which sucks. And yeah, it totally sucks. And we're working less hours just because at a certain point on Zoom, you just kind of get, you know, like,
you can't stare at a screen for that long.
Yeah, you have to be, you know, situated like you would never do this in a real office environment. And so it's just kind of hard to create where you're like, excuse me, oh, no, I'm sorry, what's your pitch? And, you know, it gets all weird. And, you know, there's certainly comedy. There's a ton of comedy when people are speaking over each other. But basically, yeah, like I'm really thankful that we've had some of the same writers from season 1. Like I think like 40% is the same staff from the first season. And then we don't have a lot of turnover in the writers. And the 4 new writers we hired last year, we all brought them back. So in a good way, everybody knows the show and specifically knows the season we just came off of because they were there to craft it. So that's been such a huge blessing. And again, hiring smart people makes it a lot easier to to finish it. So I don't know what I would do if this was like a new show right now, trying to break a new show with new writers who don't know each other in this environment. It would be the worst. So, but we're doing the best we can.
Yeah. What do you think young or up and coming filmmakers should be doing during this time when we kind of have more time to ourselves to be either creative or sad or whatever? What should we be like turning this into, do you think?
I think all the above. I think, you know, it's a weird time. There are days where I feel like, oh man, I'm about to get a ton of stuff done. There are days where I'm just like, I just don't care today. You know what I mean? You know, you're trying to battle. at first I was pushing back more against that energy, and I've learned like, hey, just embrace it. Like, you've never been through anything like this before. Your kids haven't, your wife hasn't. So like, I'm very hard on myself. So I just had to start giving myself like, fuck it, just give yourself some fuck it time, and just be like, hey, you're alive, your family's healthy, you're not having to worry about where your meal's coming from. There's people out there who are really trying to figure out the world right now and like their survival. And like, those aren't my problems today. And so I'm very thankful. So I try to give myself those moments too. So I don't want to tell anybody right now with, again, all that's happening in the world health-wise, all that's happening in the world civil unrest-wise, what they should be doing or not doing. I will say just be in tune with yourself. And if you're feeling creative, create. And if you're not feeling creative, be okay that you're saying, I'm not, but I will be. Because sometimes when you like take that pressure off yourself, because the thing that you're supposed to, the thing that I'm really trying to get back to, and it's really hard, but the thing that I'm really trying to do is remember that when I was a kid, I was creating because it was fun. I wasn't like making up stories and playing games because it was like my job, and creativity comes out of fun, not out of pressure. I've never been in a situation where I've seen somebody yell at somebody and go, give me the joke, and the jokes just come. It's like life doesn't, you usually just kind of like sitting around and you're like, a thought pops into your head kind of random because you're not putting the pressure on yourself for it to come out. And so I think that like, that's the space I'm trying to like, kind of always kind of a Zen place I'm trying to get back to is like, yeah, you have all these projects. Yeah, you have all these things to do. Yeah, you have all these things. But like at the end of the day, like if it's not fun for you, chuck it. If you're not having fun creating the stuff you're doing, put it down until it does. When it starts feeling like a chore and a job, not that you don't have a job, but when it starts to feel that kind of a way where you're like, oh, I'm not getting it, just put it down. And, so I'm trying to give myself those things. And I would encourage other people too as well. Just remember that it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
Running out of time. I do our last question just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of childhood, what was your favorite childhood film?
My favorite childhood film. Oof. My favorite childhood film that I could probably watch, I have two, and I guess I wouldn't say they're childhoods. Like Coming to America, I could watch like right now 5 times in a row, quote every line and be like that. Also, I was a huge Weird Science nerd movie fan. Like I love John Hughes, but Weird Science I particularly loved. And I think it was because again, it was like 2 nerds creating a girl on a computer because they can't get them, and that get a girl. That was very much my life. So Weird Science is what I love. I also love, and I could watch anytime. It's also like I love rewatching 80s movies and watching the very bald racism that exists when like white people go to like black blues clubs and seeing all the like, oh, you can't say that today.
Like let it go because you enjoyed it in the past.
Yeah, it's just fun to watch. Like, oh man, they just called that person that. That's crazy.
Yeah, I get that. Well, thank you so much. This was so lovely to talk with you. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, you're welcome. Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Prentice, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you guys. It's so good to see your faces.
You too. And Valerie did a great job.
Valerie, that was awesome.
Fantastic.
Yes.
And Prentice, you're very illuminating and really cool. Just want to let everybody know. I know we wrote some things into the chat notes. Check out Insecure on HBO, Uncorked on Netflix, and I think I'm right that Upscale's on Hulu.
It's on True, but I guess, is it going to Hulu? It's got to go to, you got to get that on Hulu.
I don't know what they're doing with that.
They need to move that over to one of those other platforms. I saw it on True.
Okay.
But I think that there's now like a True Hulu thing, but then I don't know. But I see True's doing stuff with Netflix. They need to get that over to one of those other places.
But it's all great stuff. So, and everybody who's still on, check out gatherproject.net. We're going to be doing this every other Friday. Go ahead and sign up for our mailing list and check out what we're doing. And Prentice will
come see us in Miami, Prentice.
Yeah, come
as soon as I can. I'm coming down. I was supposed to be there for a film festival out there, but I'm not going. Obviously,
Right.
Well, hopefully we get to see you in person soon.
Absolutely.
And thank you, New York, NYU.
Great
you guys
job,
are
guys.
awesome.
You did a fantastic job. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you, Prentice.
Take care,
That was
Prentice. Thanks for your
amazing.
time.
Thank you guys. Thank you.